I used to chase perfect lighting and polished poses, but wildlife photography flipped everything I knew about photography. And quite honestly, even about myself. Out in the wild, there are no retakes. There's no control. It's just raw moments. And they changed the way I shoot everything. In today's show, I'm going to share 3 ways that wildlife photography has made me a better photographer and probably even a better human. Hey, by the way, I'm Jeff from Magnolia Photography SC, professional wildlife photographer located in Charleston, South Carolina. If you are returning to the channel, I want to thank you for stopping by yet again. And if you are new, then I want to welcome you in and thank you for joining us today. I don't know about you guys, but wildlife photography, I have always found it to be very thought-provoking and very impactful from both a personal standpoint as well as a professional photographer standpoint. Is it just me, or when you're out in the wild, do you feel some sort of special connection with nature and wildlife itself? I know I do. And that is something that I remember feeling for the first time when I got into wildlife photography. And I felt like that was a moment that changed me as a human. There was something very special that I felt being out photographing wildlife. You know, we talk all the time that, most people really don't ever get to experience what we experience as wildlife photographers. I mean, what we get to see out in the wild is pretty special. It really is a gift. But then again, I would have to say there's probably times that we experience certain things out in the wild that kind of is a burden as well. I mean, let's face it, right? Let's be honest. Wildlife can be pretty ugly. That is the reality of wildlife. It can just be cruel sometimes. And sometimes watching those things, experiencing those things isn't pleasant in the least. But overall, wildlife is beautiful. And I don't know if you're like me, but I just feel this absolutely amazing connection when I'm out photographing the birds or the animals or whatever it is. With that being said, let's jump in to today's topic. Number 1 on how wildlife photography has changed me. It has made me a better photographer because it has made me a more focused photographer. By that, I mean, I tend to shoot and photograph wildlife with more of a purpose. I tend to be a lot more deliberate when I go about taking my pictures. Now, as I've shared with you guys many times on this show, I used to be a wedding photographer, a portrait photographer. And yeah, that was certainly challenging. I mean, there's no doubt wedding photography is hard. There's a lot of challenging aspects to it. And of course, when someone's paying you thousands of dollars, you have that added stress of you can't get anything wrong. I mean, think about this for a second. One missed moment in someone's wedding and you are hated, right? You will get slammed on social media. Your reviews will be awful. People will badmouth you. You'll get a bad reputation. And that is a sure way to kill your business. We don't have those stresses in wildlife photography unless you're hired by some big company to do a wildlife project, but you get where I'm going with it, right? We typically don't have people paying us thousands of dollars for a wildlife photo. So we don't have that stress of needing to perform because someone is paying us. But wedding photography was very difficult in the sense you needed to have a extensive skill set. So many things that you're photographing throughout the day. I mean, you would start the day going in, right? Photographing the getting ready part of the day, people doing hair and makeup. And during that time, you'd often be photographing, the bride's jewelry and her shoes and her wedding dress, right? So you're photographing attire. So product photography is essentially what you're doing there. And of course, you're photographing people all day long, so you better know how to be good at photographing portraits and those types of things. With weddings, you need to be really good at photojournalism because you need to know when to take photos from the shadows, but you also need to know when you, as the photographer, need to actually inject yourself into the scene and take a little bit more charge. because sometimes that is necessary. Then you're photographing cakes, you're photographing dancing. So you're doing all these different types of photography, but more importantly, you have to be a good storyteller. That's what a wedding day really is all about, is it not? It's the story of this couple and the story of how their day began and how their day came to an end, right? And all those memories and all those moments that unfolded in between are what matters most to them. That's a big task. That's a big ask. But wildlife photography is not as controlled as a wedding. And what's funny is many times when you're photographing a wedding, the last word you will use is control, because you typically feel like a lot of things are kind of out of control. A wedding day can be pretty chaotic. But wildlife photography has no control. It's truly raw, right? We get what wildlife gives us, and we get what Mother Nature gives us as far as lighting and those types of things. And that's where wildlife photography has made me such a better photographer, by making me more deliberate in how I use light and how I do all of those things. You know, you just can't go out with a camera to capture wildlife and take the spray and pray approach where you just point your camera at something and fire away. That's where being deliberate comes in. What are you using for a background? What is the best way to use the lighting that exists in the scene? What do you need to do to change your position? What do you need to do to change your shooting angle? Do you need to go high? Do you need to go low? Do you need to move 15 feet to the left or 45 feet to the right to get the shot that you want to get, to create something that's meaningful, to create something that's emotional? This is what wildlife photography has done for me. Is this something that it's done for you? And maybe you can't answer that right now. Maybe you're newer to wildlife photography. And maybe that's just not something that you have enough experience with. But if you've been doing it for a while, I'd like to know, do you feel that as a photographer of wildlife that you've become more deliberate? Number two, wildlife photography has made me much more aware of my composition. Now, I don't care what genre of photography we're talking about. Composition is always at the top of the list of critical techniques, right? Critical things that you need to consider. And yeah, I mean, let's face it. I mean, photographing weddings, I had to deal with compositional elements all the time, of course. But I do think that wildlife photography has a greater freedom when it comes to composition. When you're photographing weddings, I think you do, on some level, need to take a slightly more conservative approach. That's what people are paying for. They're not paying for you to experiment with their wedding. It's okay to maybe take a handful of experimental pictures during a wedding, and if they work out, great, and if they don't, no big deal, as long as you are delivering that other 95% that the client expects. But you're doing a lot of portrait work and you're doing a lot of those types of shots. And yeah, you change the composition. You're going to change your focal lengths. You're going to change the distance that you physically are to your client. You're going to change, how you photograph them. You might have some full body shots, some 3/4 shots, some half body shots, and maybe you'll work in a few tight shots here and there. But you're not straying too far from those things. When you start to photograph the rings, the shoes, the attire, all those types of things, yeah, you can open up the creative bucket a little bit more, right? Throw in some different shots, some different compositions, but you probably should still get kind of quote unquote the standard shots first. You need to make sure that you get all the shots, that you have some really solid, well-composed shots before you start branching out into those more creative images. But those are the things that you used to do as a wedding photographer. But when it comes to wildlife photography, man, I feel like the world of composition has opened up. There are the rules of composition that we talk all the time. Rule of thirds, very common, right? Used all the time. Using framing, using leading lines, filling the frame, right? All those types of things. Those are compositional elements. But with wildlife photography, I think what it has taught me is to push the boundaries a little bit. Yeah, let's use those rules, right? Those are rules, but they really are guidelines. But I try to do a little bit more experimental things. I might want to do something that is rule of thirds, but I may not want to just do the standard rule of thirds and see something the way we always see it. I might want to try to modify that a little bit and try to create something a little bit more interesting by changing it up, by breaking that rule, by pushing the boundaries of that rule. So yeah, it's experimental. It's a little bit of a risk-taking adventure. And maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. And if it doesn't work, then big deal. What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to lose the shot? Well, I could be heartbreaking, but I mean, maybe it's a great moment or a cool species. But that's a good point. What if it is a new species for you? What if it is something special? Well, then I would urge you to take the approach that I took with wedding photography. Get the shot that works first. If that's all you get and you got a special bird there or something and you get the shot and he flies away, then so be it. At least you got a good shot. But don't try something experimental and wind up with nothing. Get the shot that that works, get the solid one. And then from there, try to get creative. Try to mix it up with your composition. Try to mix it up with your shooting angle. Do those things to try to capture that species in an uncommon way, right? I say this a lot. You want to capture the common in an uncommon way. You want to create emotional photographs, create it in a way that people are not used to seeing it. Boy, does that grab their attention. But this is another way that wildlife photography has really impacted me is composition. Number 3, wildlife photography has made me a better photo editor. Hey, look, when I was photographing weddings, like I said a little while ago, a lot of the day felt chaotic, right? And there were definitely things that you didn't have control over. But then there were a lot of things I did have control over. If I was taking a couple out for, their wedding photos, I could take them around wherever we were and I could go, you know what? There's the perfect background. I want you guys to stand right here while I take some pictures. And I would place them there. And then I would have my lighting assistant go stand where I wanted them to stand so that I could get the lighting that I wanted. And then, of course, I could do whatever I wanted to do with my camera settings to create whatever mood I wanted to create. So that's how weddings was pretty controllable, right? I mean, you can do a lot of different things, but what that produces is a lot of photos with a lot of consistency from an exposure standpoint and so on down the line. And of course, I was using lenses with very wide apertures, right? I would be using apertures of f1.8 to f2.8. That was commonly the range that I was in. Well, that makes it a lot easier to separate your subject from your background because you're going to add that quick background blur into your photo, which just naturally makes your subjects pop. Well, that stuff makes everything else a little bit easier, right? Makes the editing process a little bit easier because you've already created that isolation, that separation. Wildlife photography is not like that. Not as much anyway. Yeah, we can still get great background blur, but once again, we don't get to place our subject in front of the perfect background and have them stand the perfect distance away from that background. We have to sit and hope and pray that our subject comes into the frame where we want them to come into it in order for all those things to happen. And let's face it, usually it doesn't happen like that. But we generally have to kind of deal with what we're given out there. And it's not always the most ideal. We don't always get the perfect background. Sometimes we get backgrounds that are kind of, minimally distracting, maybe moderately distracting. And then it's our job as the photographer to bring that photo into editing to figure out what we can do to reduce the distractions. What can we do to reduce those distractions, minimize those distractions, and really place the emphasis where it should be on our subject? Photo editing, for me, got better with wildlife photography because I feel like you need to be a lot more strategic about how you go about doing those things. And that's where we're going to use a lot of those tools that we have in our editing software. We're going to use those lighting tools, exposure and highlights and shadows. We're going to use contrast. We're going to use a lot of local adjustments so that we can really specifically call out certain parts of our image and apply an edit. Whether that be making a certain part of the image a little bit brighter or darker, maybe adding or subtracting a little contrast here and there, maybe even adjusting the color, right? Maybe we'll saturate the colors a little extra here and maybe bring down the saturation over here. And then we can change the vibrancy and the vividness of those colors and how they're playing into the scene, right? We want them to complement our subject, not take it over. So getting really good at this thing, right? This editing thing takes a little bit of time to figure out, am I overdoing it? Am I underdoing it? What should I be doing? What is the purpose here? At the end of the day, we're looking to draw the attention to our subject. That's what photography is all about. Basic photography is when you take a picture, this is what you should be thinking about. What's my subject? You should have one subject and one subject only. And you should also be thinking, when I take this picture, is there anything that I can include in the frame that's going to serve to enhance my subject? And if it doesn't, then you have to get rid of it. And sometimes that can be the most heartbreaking decision, is getting rid of something that you think really adds value to the photo. But if you're honest with yourself and you're honest with just photography as a whole, sometimes those things that we think are amazing just destroy our photos. And it's just not worth having it in there. Those are the three ways that wildlife photography has changed me as a photographer for the better. Making me more deliberate, making me more creative, and making me a better photo editor to ensure that I am bringing out the best in my subject. What do you guys think? Are these things that you can relate to in your wildlife photography? I would love to know. Speaking of editing, if you head over to my store, magnoliaphotographysc.com/store, there's also a link in the show notes because God knows I can barely say that even once. But you will be taken over to my store where I have my DxO Photolab 8 Masterclass. If you want to learn DxO, if you want to improve your skills in DxO, this course is for you. I highly recommend that you go check that out. And if you're new to DxO and maybe looking to purchase it or maybe purchase some of their other software, don't forget that in the show notes below, I also have a link that will take you over to DxO. And when you use that link in conjunction with my discount code at the time of checkout, just enter Magnolia. That is going to get you 15% off any of your purchases. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this. Be sure to check out this next video.